So Brenda and Kelly, who I called out earlier in the service, I want to invite you to come with me to my daughter's wedding up in New York in 2 weeks. Because the standing joke around our family is, how in the world I'm performing the service? How in the world am I going to get through that service without crying? So if I had you guys sitting right in the front row, making your hand gestures, it would just be perfect. Oh, golly. Brenda said, I haven't been called out in church since I was a little girl. No calling out, no calling out. But it makes me think about the device we have figured out that we just might use to keep me from crying in my daughter's service. See, we're getting married up in New York or she's getting married up in New York. It's going to be so much fun. Oh, at a summer camp, a girls' summer camp is the setting for it. And she has found this sound machine. It's a little device about like this, and you can push any one of about 12 buttons, and it makes 12 different sounds. So, like, it makes the sound of applause or laughing or a fart. Can we say that in church? I don't know. Or it makes the wah, 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 wah sound, right? So Teresa's decided that she's going to give this sound machine to her sister. And if I start to cry more than just watery eyes, then her sister's to push one of the buttons. Oh, golly, golly. So we are continuing our series called Keys to the Kingdom. It's all about the abundant life. We know that abundance is all about living in the flow of life, in the flow of all the good things that you hold dear, because we know that God is infinite. And therefore, the thing about being in the flow is that we're in the flow in every moment. Each week we've talked about a different key to abundance and the abundant life. And today's key is about being in the flow. Being in the flow. And so I opened up this book by Eric Butterworth called In the Flow of Life. And it's a wonderful book on prosperity teachings. And here's how he defines God. He says, God is a sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. So that means God is centered everywhere. God is centered in each of you. God is centered right where you are always, and right where you are always, because God is everywhere and God is infinite. And so when we get it, that God is right where we are, we realize we are always in the flow, just as we are. Butterworth says that it's living in the flow is kind of like what Kierkegaard noticed many years ago. He said, just imagine if you were living in a desert, a dry, hot desert. And suddenly you became aware that right underneath your tent where you'd been living all this time was a hidden spring. And you could tap into the water of this spring anytime you wanted. And Butterworth says, it's like that for us. He says we have the same feeling of security and well-being when, after years of living a life from the outside, thinking that happiness comes from out there somewhere, we finally turn inward and discover the source within. You see, life is lived from the inside out, right? Life is lived from the inside out. It's not about all the tangible things that we see, but true abundance starts in here with our own consciousness. It's about living in the flow. And as we've been going through these weeks, the weeks of this series, I want to be clear that as we've given you the keys that you can practice and live from, we're not creating the flow of life. The flow of abundance is always there. We're just stepping into the flow, right? We're just making ourselves available to this flow of God's abundance. And the tips that we've been talking about for the last 7 weeks are tips that help you shake your consciousness so that you are awake and available to this flow of abundant living. And we have a choice. You see, we always have a choice as to where we're going to place our thoughts and our energies, right? We always have a choice. And in the book of John 21, there's a description of one of Jesus' resurrection appearances. The disciples are out fishing, and we know that they're expert fishermen, and they'd been fishing over and over on the left side of the boat, and they weren't catching anything. They cast their nets, but nothing was coming back. And Jesus from the shore calls to them and tells them to cast their nets on the right side of the boat. And sure enough, when they do, we are told, so they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. And what Butterworth says about this, he says, you see, it's like we choose our thoughts. We can choose to dwell on the negative. We can choose to dwell on lack and limitation, or we can choose to dwell on the positive. We can choose to dwell on truth with a capital T. He says, the device of turning in thought from negative to positive, from moods of insufficiency to attitudes of confidence, one may alter his whole experience from failure to success. On the, quote, right side of life, you get in tune with the inexorable flow of good. So we have a choice. And as we've been going through this series of the 7 keys to the kingdom of heaven, right here and now, we have a choice as to whether we take those action steps, right? It's always up to us. It's always up to us. So let's just, for a moment, remind ourselves where we've been traveling, these last 7 weeks. We started off with the key of commitment. The key of commitment. Put God first, seek God first. Put God first, seek God first. Would you say that with me? Put God first, seek God first. Because remember, Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added to you. In other words, all the things you worry about, you stew about, seek first the kingdom of heaven, and everything else will come. And then what we said was that there's a formula for abundance, and there is a formula for abundance. All the prosperity teachers teach this particular formula. And it's 3 simple components. Tithing of your time, plus tithing of your talent, plus tithing of your treasure equals the abundant life. Tithing of your time, that means the time that you give to God in your devotion, in your prayer, in your meditation, in your spiritual reading. That's the time that you tithe to God, by putting God first in your time. And then your talent, tithing of your talent, that's the acts of service that you perform, like our brand new watering team that literally sprung up out of nowhere, literally. Except we needed it, right? We needed it, and so this team has sprung up, tithing and giving of your time in service to God. And then lastly, tithing of your treasure. That means giving of your financial resources, and tithing first to spirit, or your source of spiritual food, whatever that might be for you. And when you're actively doing all 3 of those things, then you are in the flow. Because remember this, you cannot outgive God. You cannot outgive God in any one of these arenas with your time, your talent, or your treasure. As you give, then you are stepping into the flow, and you are making yourself available to receive. So the first key is commitment. Commitment. Now, the second key is vision, the power of vision. You and I all have dreams and ideas. The power of vision is that you write down your vision. You take the time to write it down in all the major areas of your life, the areas of your life like health and finances and relationships and your career, creative expression, your personal and spiritual growth. You take the time to dream and vision and ask yourself, what does abundance look like in each of these areas? And I was reading in the book, The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity by Catherine Ponder. She is really just the greatest prosperity writer of all time. And she tells in her book about a man who attended one of her prosperity classes, and she'd been teaching about writing down and documenting your vision. So he created a brand new device called a Wheel of Fortune. And let me describe what this Wheel of Fortune is. So you take a poster board or just a big piece of paper, and you draw a big circle in it, and then you draw a small circle in the center. You're going to make a wheel. Okay, the center is the hub. So in the center of this picture that you've drawn, you place some image, You cut out a picture of something that reminds you of God. Maybe it's a picture of a candle. Maybe you take a picture today of this candle, which is our Christ candle, and you put it in the center of this wheel of fortune you're going to create, because God is at the center. We create from the inside out. And then you divide up the wheel into 5 sections, and each one is one of the areas that we're visioning for. So one area is for health, one area is for relationships, finances, career, personal spiritual growth, and so on. And then you cut out pictures, you draw words, you cut out words to fill each of those sections. Now, it's very much like a vision board, and some of you have created vision boards before. But I've never quite known how to start a vision board, but this gives me some manner of an idea as to how to start, because I can collect all the things that remind me of how I want my health to be, or all the things that remind me of how I want my relationships to be, and put pictures of them. And then you've got not just a handwritten vision or typewritten vision that you may have already created. You've got a visual representation of what abundance looks like in your life, the Wheel of Fortune. I thought that was great. And the engineer who created it went on, after he created it, within a very short period of time, he landed a multi-million-dollar construction project. So try it. So the second key is about vision. The third key is about truth. Truth with a capital T. And this gets very much to our image of Jesus and the disciples. Because you can choose to think about the facts of a situation, which might not be the way you want them to be. Or you can choose to think about the truth. The facts are not the truth. The facts are not the truth. The truth is always a higher vision. The fact may be that your savings account has a low balance in it, or lower than you'd like it to have. But the truth is that God is infinite, and God is centered in you. Therefore, abundance, right? Abundance is unlimited. There is no limit to what God can do in you. Abundance is inexhaustible. Abundance is here and now, even when your human eyes can't see it. And remember what it is that Eric Butterworth said, that abundance really is an inside-out job. It starts in here. So this key of the truth says that you make a commitment that you're going to focus on the truth. You're going to always call forth the higher vision and always see the higher vision. And I love what David Owen Ritz said, and let's remember David Owen Ritz is the one who created this Keys to the Kingdom program. He says, a greater idea always heals a lesser one. So I don't know what limitations are in your life in this particular moment, on this particular day, what perceived limitations there are. But what is a higher truth that you could think, that you could choose? Because the greater idea always heals a lesser one. You want to read and listen to positive messages. Put yourself in arenas like this one where the messages are positive. And remember that our Sunday messages that we give here are online, not just in audio, but in video form. You can podcast them, put them on your iPod, the audio ones. But you want to surround yourself with positive messages. Check out the bookstore and check out our library. By the way, did you know we have a library? How many of you have actually been to our library? Okay, all right, so many of you haven't been to our library. It's downstairs, it's on the lower level. And I'll bet you'll find both the books that I'm using this morning down there in the library. In fact, somebody told me for sure because he checked one of them out last week, and he just happened to read the very passage that I shared with you today. Funny how that works. Anyway, all right, so that's truth. Making the choice, you're going to cast your net on the right side of the boat. All right, the fourth key we talked about was forgiveness. Remember we talked about forgiveness and how judgments, resentments, and unforgivenesses are like lugging around with you this heavy sack of potatoes. And if you keep it around long enough, the potatoes are going to sprout those roots that just sort of grip your heart, shut you down. If you keep them long enough, they become moldy and stinky, right? That's what happens in your life. So what you want to look for is is a regular practice of forgiveness. I want to tell you a story from the book, The Dynamic Laws of Prosperity. It seems that there was a woman whose husband had passed and who had found herself in a legal battle with one of his former business partners, who was also a very good friend of their family. She was actually suing this former friend of the family. And she was tied up in knots about it. She was feeling very distraught. So she went to a prayer group at her church. And she poured out her story to the prayer group, the whole story, all of it, right? They heard the whole story, and after she poured it out, then they said to her that what she needed to do was to forgive the man. Well, here's how she responded to that. She said, "Forgive him? I only wanted you to pray that I would win against him in the court case. He's done such terrible things," she said. But the prayer group stood firm. She went back the next week. Again, they said, what you need to do is to forgive the man. So finally, one day, in great frustration, she hollered out to God. And she said, and I want you to listen to these words. She said, "Lord, I humanly cannot forgive this man. But if you can, please forgive him through me." Have you ever been in that situation where you felt like you couldn't forgive someone? And maybe you've got someone today in your life, in your heart, and you just can't. But here's what I want you to know. Two things. Number one, forgiveness is one of the greatest roadblocks to prosperity. And number two, all things are possible with God. That if you open up and invite God to move through you, God can make that forgiveness happen. And so this woman, she did that, and after she hollered out to God, she felt a peace come over her, and within a very short period of time, this man that she was suing came to visit her. And he said he came not to talk about the court case. He came just because they'd once been friends, and he loved her deceased husband just like she did, and just wanted to remember some things. And so they did. They just went down memory lane together for a while, and before long they did find themselves back talking about the court case. But by now their hearts were open and forgiveness had entered the room. And in that place they were able to then reach an amicable settlement out of court, a settlement that served them both. All because she took that moment of intention to let God work through her for forgiveness. So forgiveness is powerful. Forgiveness is powerful, and it's a powerful daily activity as well. The truth is that it's a good daily practice to do at the end of each day. I was with a couple of moms this weekend, both of whom have daughters that have been raised in unity, and they both do a spiritual practice with their children at the end of each day. Their daughters recite for their forgivenesses. Sometimes they forgive themselves, sometimes they forgive others. Whatever is still irritating them, they speak that out loud at the end of the day. Just imagine if you and I did that. Imagine if you did that with your children, or if you did that with your grandchildren when they come to visit with you. Start a brand new practice of forgivenesses, and then they move into gratitudes after that. And that brings us to our next key, which is gratitude. Gratitude is the magic multiplier of God. What we appreciate does appreciate. Many of you have started keeping your gratitude journal. And one couple wrote me to tell me that they're not doing a gratitude journal per se, but what they're doing is having gratitude time at their supper every night. Now think about that. You know, you come home and you get with your life partner or your roommate, and sometimes it's like there's nothing to say, right? You just find yourself looking at the newspaper. I mean, imagine if what you were doing during that supper time was sharing all the things you were grateful for during the day. And, you know, remember that the way to be in gratitude and appreciation, the first step is you just have to notice the good. You have to be willing to notice the good. That means casting your net, maybe in a different frame of mind. And then you begin to notice the good, and then you praise the good. You know, when you praise the good, you get into the feeling of it. You celebrate whatever it is. The smallest seedling, the smallest amount of rain, you praise it, right? And you also make a commitment to trying to see the good where it's not easy to see. I love the song that Kelly sang earlier about God. I'm in the darkness, I'm in the light. God is with you in the darkness. God is with you in the light. You don't deny the darkness, but you open to being available for the blessing that can emerge even and sometimes especially from the dark times. So gratitude, so important in our life. And then last week we discussed, before we get to last week, I have to remember the way to stare down the negativity of life that Emma Curtis Hopkins taught us to do, right? You stare it down when it's really negative and you say, this too is God, this too is good, this too is for me, and I demand to see the blessing in it, right? So she's going. She's got her hands on her hip. Okay, all right, let's do that again. So repeat after me. This too is God. This too is God. This too is good. This too is for me. And I demand to see the blessing in it. Yeah. All right, which brings us to last week. Last week was about making room for the new, really opening your consciousness. You know, the universe loves a vacuum. As you release and let go, then you make room for the good. We talked about uncluttering your house. Thank you for the pictures that some of you have sent me about the piles of clothes you're going to give away. Send more pictures, post them on our Facebook page, to encourage one another. We actually got started in our house. My daughter, who is home for her wedding in 2 weeks, she went down and started in the basement. She's got big old piles of clothes she's going to give away. And she managed to coax me down there into that scary, dark place. And it is scary and it is dark. However, she helped me begin to formulate a plan. So I've not cleaned it out yet, but I've got the beginnings of a plan for how to proceed. As I said to somebody earlier, be careful what you say from the platform on Sunday morning, because people will come back and say, how's it going, Patricia? So we're starting. Baby steps, we're starting. So we talked about uncluttering your life. That's an important way that you can make room for the new. And take time to look in your finances, to actually see and examine all the accounts that you have. Wherever it is that you're hiding money under the mattress, put it all on a ledger, a spreadsheet of some sort, so that you know what you've got, and then you bless it. You bless what you have, and what you have grows. And then the other thing that we talked about also last week was setting goals, the power of setting goals. Write them down, be specific, and think big. Think big with your goals. David Owen Ritz, the founder of this program, Keys to the Kingdom, tells a story about how he's always loved goals. He's always had goals. He believes in having 10 at a time. So a number of years ago, when he was moving into his first church, the first church where he was to be an ordained minister, he was unpacking boxes, and he discovered there an old list of goals. 10 years old it was. And it really delighted him to see that, he'd achieved most of those goals. Sometimes goals almost magically accomplish themselves once you have written them down. I'm not saying it doesn't take work, but sometimes they just seem to happen. He got to the last goal, and the goal that he read there on his first day in his new church, the goal read, to become an ordained minister and to have my own church. How beautiful and symbolic that was for him. So today, our key is about being in the flow. And being in the flow really is a way of being. So the key is being. It's being abundance. It's claiming, I am abundance. Would you say that with me? I am abundance. It's claiming, I am in the flow. And then you can say, I'm in the flow of love. I'm in the flow of peace. I'm in the flow of whatever it is that you seek. It's being. All these keys we've been talking about. It's being them. And so I created for you a handout, if you're interested, of all the action steps that we've talked about throughout this series. And it is on the reception desk to your right as you leave today. Each of the action steps that we have talked about over this series is written down here. There's a lot of them. It takes commitment to this way of being, doesn't it? So we're going to end today I'm going to invite you to pull out of your bulletin this insert. Now, we rarely have inserts in this new format bulletin, but this is here specially because we want to work with this today. If you don't have this prayer list handy, if you want to raise your hand, the ushers will bring them to you. The ushers have extras. So if you don't have one or you've already filled it out, raise your hand really high and the ushers will bring you one. Really high and they'll find you and bring it to you. And the reason that we want to work with this prayer sheet today is that in a week and a half at Unity Village, we're having a united time of prayer. Once a year, this united time of prayer. Hundreds of thousands of people will be sending in their prayer requests. And one of the things we know about abundance is that the surest way to begin to be in the flow yourself is to help someone else achieve what it is that you seek. And how better to help someone else experience the abundant life than to pray for them. And so the names that you turn in, we will send on your behalf to Unity Village. And then they will be personally prayed over in the Silent Unity Prayer Chapel that day. In fact, you can come and join in and sit in the prayer chapel and take these stacks of prayer requests and pray over them. So I'm going to invite you now to just take a moment, first of all, to center in. Get something to write with, and in a moment, you're going to have the opportunity to write names on this form. Oh, dear God. Dear God, the infinite presence that is centered in each person in this room. The infinite presence that is everywhere present all the time. Dear God, we know that through you all things are possible. So in this moment, we claim abundance for ourselves and we claim it for the people we love. We claim it for our acquaintances. And as names and faces begin to come to you, I invite you to write them on this sacred prayer form, knowing that in the moment that you write each name, that person is blessed. Knowing that a dedicated prayer worker will pray over these names, whispering them out loud. Perhaps you've already sent in your list of names to Silent Unity. I invite you to enlarge your circle. Perhaps you want to pray for the checker at the grocery store, or the person who sits 4 rows behind you in church. You can use first names, you can use first and last names. You can fill this page with 3 names on a line. Just allow the names to come to you. And know that you are writing them right here in this sacred container of possibility. This sacred container we call Unity Church of Overland Park. And if you are listening to us online, just know that you are part of this community too, and you can always send your prayer requests in to us, and we will hold them in sacred prayer. Look at the names that you're writing. These people who are blessed by you. These people for whom you can see and know abundance, even if they can't see and know it yet for themselves. And so, dear God, we surrender these prayers of our heart. We turn them over to you, knowing that through you all things are possible, and as we ask, so we shall receive. We pray this after the nature and through the power that we share with the living Christ. It is done. Amen. And before you finish this sheet, put your own name on it too, because you are awesome. God bless you.